The town had been dead long before Logan arrived. He could tell by the smell, mildew soaked into drywall rot, settling into what used to be grocery shelves. The particular sweetness of decay that stopped being sharp after the first 2 years and became something closer to weather. Just part of the air. He stood at the edge of what had been a gas station, one boot resting on a cracked concrete island where pumps used to stand, and he read the town the way he'd learned to read every place in the years since the world stopped being the world he recognized. Broken glass swept to the side of a doorway. Someone had lived here recently enough to care about clean floors. 3 cans stacked near a back wall, labels torn off people who knew better than to advertise what they had. Scratch marks on the door frame at shoulder height. The kind that came from barricading something in a hurry, night after night. Whoever they were, they'd been organized. Whoever they were gone now. Logan stepped off the concrete island and moved into the street. The town was 2 blocks of storefronts and a residential grid behind them. The kind of place that existed to serve as a highway, and not much else. Cars sat where people had abandoned them, some with doors still open, some with windows caved in, most sitting low on flat tires. A walker drifted between 2 vehicles about 40 yards ahead, head swinging, tracking nothing. Logan clocked it, kept his distance, moved along the opposite side of the street without breaking stride. The walker didn't turn. His boots made almost no sound on the asphalt. He wasn't looking for anything specific. Food would be good. Somewhere dry to put his back against a wall for a few hours would be better. What he found instead, moving through a gap between a hardware store and what used to be a diner, was the sound of people trying not to die. He heard them before he saw them. Low voices cracking under pressure, the metallic scrape of something being dragged. A woman saying, "We need to move," in the tone of someone who had been saying it for too long without result. Logan moved to the corner of the hardware store and looked. The alley was maybe 15 feet wide and ended in a chain-link fence that someone had tried to reinforce with scrap wood. It hadn't held well. On the far side of the fence, walkers pressed against it in a loose cluster, 8, maybe 10, pushing, without urgency the way they always did, the way water found a crack. On this side, 4 people stood in a rough cluster near the fence's weaker section, watching it bow inward with each pulse of weight. One of them was working the bolt on a rifle that clearly wasn't going to fire. An older man, heavy-set, flannel shirt, dark with old sweat. He worked the bolt, checked the chamber, worked it again, his hands moving through a ritual that had stopped producing results. Beside him, a younger man held a length of rebar and said nothing. A teenage girl stood flat against the brick wall, with a backpack pressed to her chest, like it was armor. And in front of all of them, the woman Logan had heard, early 30s, dark hair pulled back with a strip of cloth. A knife in each hand was measuring the distance between her and the fence. Like she was doing math she didn't like the answer to. That was Mara, though. Logan didn't know her name yet. The fence groaned. One of the wood braces shifted. Logan didn't announce himself. He moved around the corner into the alley, scanned the configuration. In about 2 seconds, walkers clustered at the far end. Blocked sightlines, fence degrading at the lower left, where the scrap wood had pulled from the chain link and went straight for the problem. He didn't run. Running drew more attention than it solved. He walked fast and low-angled toward the fence's weaker section. And when he was close enough, he put both hands on the rebar crossbrace and wrenched it sideways, redirecting the weight of the walkers, pressing against it, so the cluster pivoted instead of pushing through. A hand shot through a gap in the chain link where the scrap wood had buckled. Teeth found his left forearm pressure wet, heat the specific grip of something that wouldn't let go on instinct. Logan didn't flinch. He tore his arm free and kept both hands on the brace. The walkers on the other side shuffled and reorganized toward the new pressure point. Slow, predictable. Logan used the 3 seconds that bought him to look back at the group. "Move," he said. "Left side, now." The man with the rifle stared at him. The teenage girl didn't move. The one with the rebar took a step backward, which was the wrong direction. Mara moved. She grabbed the teenage girl's arm and pulled her toward the left side of the alley without asking anyone's permission, and the other 2 followed because she was already moving and there was nothing else to do. Logan held the brace another moment, then released it and backed away from the fence in a straight line, letting the walkers find the path of least resistance, which was now the right side away from where the group was heading. He got them to a gap in the fence near the hardware store's back wall, a section where the chain link had been cut long ago and folded back. One by one they pushed through. The teenage girl caught her backpack on the wire and Mara freed it without stopping 2 seconds clean. The man with the rifle went last, still holding the useless weapon. Logan went through after him. They ended up in a narrow service corridor between the hardware store and the building behind it. Enough room for all 5 of them, barely with a rusted door at one end that opened into the hardware store's back room. Logan checked the door. Unlocked. The latch was warped frame, swollen with damp. It would close but wouldn't hold against anything deliberate. He pushed it open, swept the interior with a look, and stepped inside. The back room smelled like motor oil and old cardboard. Shelving units, most of them stripped. A workbench along one wall. 2 small windows near the ceiling, both intact, enough light to see by without advertising a fire. The group came in behind him. Logan moved to the far corner where he could see both the door and the windows, crossed his arms, and waited. The man with the rifle set it against the wall. He was breathing hard. "Where did you come from?" "Doesn't matter," Logan said. "It kind of does," Mara said. She was still holding both knives' blades down, but she hadn't put them away. She was watching him with the same measuring look she'd had in the alley, and Logan could tell the calculation she was running wasn't, "Is this man dangerous?" She'd already filed that under, probably yes, but is this man's danger pointed at us or at something else? "You were in trouble," Logan said. "Now you're not. That's the whole story." "You didn't ask," the younger man with the rebar said. He had a bruise along his jaw, days-old yellowing. "You just came in." "Would you have preferred I didn't?" Nobody answered that. The teenage girl had set her backpack down and was checking the contents with systematic focus inventory over everything else. The man with the rifle. Logan put him at 50, maybe older. The kind of face that had been outdoors through all seasons for many years sat down on an overturned crate and rubbed his hands together like he was trying to warm them, though it wasn't cold. Logan let them settle. He didn't press for conversation, and he didn't explain himself. And after a few minutes, the room stopped feeling like a standoff and started feeling like what it was. 5 people waiting out a bad situation in a space that was for now secure. Then a walker came through the service corridor outside and hit the door. Not hard. One impact, then the drag of hands against wood, then silence. The teenage girl flinched. The man with the rifle picked it back up on reflex. Logan didn't move. "It'll lose interest," he said. Another impact. Then the shuffle of feet moving away. Mara lowered herself to a sitting position against the wall without breaking her watch on the door. She hadn't sheathed the knives. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No. You move like you've been doing this a long time. Long enough." She looked at him for a moment, and he could tell she was deciding how hard to push. She decided not to for now. Practical. He noted that. They stayed quiet for a stretch, 10 minutes, maybe 15. The light through the high windows shifted as clouds moved. Logan used the time to listen the town outside, the distant, irregular percussion of walkers moving through streets, the occasional creak of the building adjusting to wind. Nothing that meant immediate trouble. He was still running that inventory when the man with a rifle stood and walked past him to check the door. Some need to do something to confirm the coast was clear, and a walker hit it from the other side at exactly the wrong moment. The door flew open, catching the man in the shoulder, knocking him sideways. The walker came through the gap, and Logan was already moving. He caught the walker by the collar and drove it backward into the door frame, and in the same motion the claws came out, snicked clean and fast, the sound like blades leaving a sheath made of bone. He put one through the walker's skull and pulled it back and let the body drop. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. Pain flared along his knuckles where the metal emerged. He filed it the way you filed weather. He turned around. The claws retracted, the small wound sealed as he moved. Skin drawing closed in seconds, nothing left but the memory of damage. All 4 of them were staring. The teenage girl had her back against the far wall. The man with the rifle had it up, pointed at Logan, though his hands weren't steady. The rebar kid was frozen. Mara had both knives raised, and her weight was on her back foot, and she was looking at his hands. "What are you?" she said. "Not who. What?" Logan looked at the body on the floor, then at the group. He held up one hand, palm out, no claws. "The same thing I was 5 minutes ago," he said. "Someone who got you out of the alley." "You were bitten," the man with the rifle said. His voice was thin. "Out there. I saw it. It bit your arm." Logan pulled back his left sleeve. The skin was unmarked. No redness, no bruising, no wound. He let them look. "That's not possible," the rebar kid said. "Apparently it is," Logan said, and pushed the sleeve back down. The rifle didn't lower. Logan didn't move toward it and didn't move away from it. He stood where he was and let the man decide, because pushing the moment would only make it worse. After about 30 seconds, the barrel dipped toward the floor. Not because the man trusted him, because the man was tired and there were more pressing threats outside, and he didn't have the energy to manage another one in here. Mara hadn't lowered her knives yet. She was still doing math. "Why did you help us?" she asked. "You needed it." "That's not usually enough." "Usually," Logan said. She held the question another moment, then slowly sheathed one knife. The other she kept at her side. Pragmatic compromise. Logan almost respected it. They stayed in the hardware store until the light outside shifted toward late afternoon. The kind of long gold that meant 2 hours to full dark, maybe less. The rebar kid found a half case of bottled water under one of the stripped shelves. Warm plastic tasting the best thing in the room, and passed it around without being asked. The teenage girl drank 2 bottles fast and didn't apologize. Nobody asked her to. When Logan stood and moved toward the back door, nobody stopped him. Mara watched him go with the same look she'd had throughout, measuring, filing, not finished processing. He paused at the door. Not because he had something to say exactly, but because something needed to be said clearly. "If you want to stay alive." Logan said, "You didn't see any of it." "People talk," Mara said. "Then talk about something else." He went out the back into the corridor, through the gap in the fence, and into the quiet of the street beyond. The walker that had found the door earlier was gone, moved on to something else. The late light made long shadows between the cars. Logan pulled his sleeve up one more time and checked the spot on his forearm where the bite had been. The way you checked a thing you already knew the answer to. The skin was clean. He pushed the sleeve down and kept walking. Behind him in the hardware store, Mara sat with her back against the shelving unit and turned the last hour over in her mind. She thought about the claws. She thought about the bite. She thought about the way the wounds on his knuckles had closed like a seam being sewn shut by something invisible, clean and fast, and completely wrong by every rule she'd built her survival on. "If that's real," she said to no one in particular, "everything changes." The man with the rifle didn't answer. He was looking at the door Logan had gone through, and his expression was the expression of a man who had just realized that the world which he thought he had mostly figured out had added a new variable he didn't know how to account for. The teenage girl had already stopped moving. She was on her side against the wall, backpack under her head, one hand still looped through a strap, out before anyone made a decision about it. Outside, the town settled into its nightly quiet. Somewhere down the block, a walker moved through the dark without purpose, without urgency, the way they always did. The sound of it faded. Then there was nothing but wind through broken windows and the particular silence of a place that had stopped waiting for anyone to come back. The trading post had no name. It didn't need one. It existed because a crossroads existed, and crossroads collected people the way low ground collected water, not by invitation, not by design, just by being the path of least resistance. Someone had pulled 3 cargo containers into a triangle, welded a corrugated iron roof across the gap, and called it neutral territory. That claim held as long as everyone had something to trade, and nobody had enough to take. Mara arrived on the second day after the alley. She had a bruise on her collarbone from the fence wire, 2 cans of beans she'd found in a car's wheel well on the walk in, and a piece of information she hadn't decided what to do with yet. The post had maybe 30 people moving through it at any given hour. Traders, scavengers, small family groups, rotating in and out of the shade, a few loners who sat with their backs to the containers and watched everything without contributing to it. She traded 1 can for a strip of dried meat and a box of matches. She kept the other can and the information. The post smelled like diesel smoke and unwashed clothing and the particular sourness of people who'd been rationing water for bathing. Everyone kept their hands visible or kept them in their pockets, and nobody reached across another person's space without asking first. It was the unwritten law of places like this: don't look too hungry, don't look too rich, don't answer questions you weren't asked. It came out anyway. It always did in places like this. Someone asked if she'd come through the town to the south because they had people who'd passed through and said the roads were getting thick. Mara said she had. They asked if she'd had trouble. She said she'd had some. They asked what kind, and she paused. The way you paused when you were deciding how much to spend, and then she said there had been a man, and the man had been bitten, and he hadn't turned. The person she told this to, a lean woman with a burn scar along one forearm who traded water filtration parts, said nothing for a moment. Then she said she'd heard something similar, second or third hand, from someone who'd come down from the hill settlements 2 weeks ago. Different man, different town. Same basic impossibility. Mara didn't confirm or expand. She finished her dried meat and left before the conversation could go further. But 30 people in a closed space is not a sealed space. By the time she was a mile down the road heading north, the story had passed through at least 4 more mouths, and in each retelling it grew 1 detail and shed 1 qualification, which is how rumor has always worked and will work until there are no more mouths to carry it. By nightfall, someone at the trading post was asking which road the man had taken north. Logan was camped in the shell of a single-story motel that had lost its roof to something fire maybe, or just years of neglect and 1 bad storm. The walls still stood. The rooms were open to sky. He'd picked the end unit because it had 2 exit points and a clear line of sight down the parking lot, and he'd slept 4 hours on a mattress that smelled like everything bad that could happen to a mattress. And he woke up because a car engine turned over about 300 yards away. And his body didn't distinguish between sounds worth caring about and sounds that weren't. It cataloged everything and made him sort it out. He lay still for a moment, listening. The engine cut out. Doors. Voices low, more than 2. Boots on gravel moving without particular urgency, which meant they weren't spooked by anything. And they weren't in a rush, which meant they had a plan. Logan sat up, rolled his shoulders, and waited. They came in through the motel's front entrance, what used to be an entrance, the glass long gone, just a frame, and there were 4 of them. 2 men in front, 1 woman trailing slightly left. 1 more man hanging back near the frame like he was covering a retreat. Or like he was a coward and hadn't committed to a story about which one it was. They had the look of people who had been eating regularly and sleeping indoors, which in this world meant they had either built something worth protecting or taken something worth keeping. The man in front was carrying a bat, no wire, just wood held loose at his thigh. "Hey," the man said, not aggressive, almost friendly. "Didn't know anyone was in here." Logan said nothing. "We're not looking for trouble," the woman said, coming up on the left side, angling slightly. "Just passing through. Saw the motel, thought we'd check for supplies." "Already checked," Logan said. "Nothing here." "Yeah." The man with the bat took a slow look around the roofless room, sky above stained walls. The stripped bed frame, Logan sitting on the edge of the mattress with his forearms on his knees. Must have been thorough. Thorough enough? There was a beat. The kind of beat that meant something was being decided. Logan had been in enough of these to know exactly where they were in the sequence. Friendly, then probing, then the ask, then the show. He was already at the show. "We heard something," the woman said. "About a man coming up from the south. Somebody said he got bit and didn't go. Said he's got something in him, heels up. Said he's moving alone." She paused. "You match the description, more or less." "Lot of men move alone," Logan said. "Sure." She smiled, and it didn't reach anything past her mouth. But not many of them turned down company. The man in back, the one near the frame, shifted his weight. Small movement. Logan's attention marked it and moved on. "What do you want?" Logan said. "We want to see if it's true," the man with the bat said. And the friendly dropped out of his voice like a coin through a grate. "Simple as that. We figure if you heal like they say, you'd be useful. Running point on cleared buildings, going first through bad stretches. You take the hits, we take the goods, everybody benefits." "That's not how it works," Logan said. "Could be." "No. Flat. Final." The man with the bat looked at the woman. The woman looked at the man near the frame, who was now holding something Logan could see was a handgun raised, but not level. An attempt at a position of authority that was about 3 seconds from becoming a problem. "Here's the thing," the woman said, keeping her voice reasonable, like she was explaining a math problem to someone slow. "We don't need your agreement. We just need to know if the story's true. So we're going to find out." The man on her right reached into his jacket and came out with a walker on a short chain. Its jaw wired half shut with baling wire, enough to muffle the sound, but not enough to stop the bite. They'd wrapped the body in plastic sheeting and duct tape from the waist down, which didn't stop the smell so much as delay it. Logan had caught it when they walked in and filed it under wrong, without knowing exactly why until now. The chain was looped to what was left of its wrist. The man released his grip, and it lurched forward, hit the end of the chain with a wet snap, and strained. Logan looked at the walker, then at the man holding the chain, then at the gun in the back. "Don't," he said. Nobody moved. He came off the mattress low and fast, not a lunge, just an immediate shift of weight that closed the distance before the man with the gun could recalibrate. Logan's left hand caught the gun wrist and bent it sharply inward. The crack was small and distinct, like a green branch. The gun dropped. The man made a sound that wasn't quite a word, and folded sideways, and Logan was already past him, turning. The man with the chain had let it go. The dead thing lurched free, swung toward the nearest sound, the man folding to the ground, and Logan stepped sideways and drove his heel into the side of its skull before it could close the distance. One motion, no pause. He didn't think about it. The threat was there, he removed it. That was all. The woman had her knife out, a good one fixed blade. She knew how to hold it, and she moved well, cutting angle fast, going for his flank. Logan stepped into it instead of away, inside her reach, and took her wrist in his right hand and walked her backward into the wall. Not hard enough to break anything, hard enough to end the conversation. "Drop it," he said. She dropped it. The man with the bat had backed against the far wall and was holding it up in both hands, and Logan could see in his face that he'd run the numbers and didn't like the result. The walker was busy. The man with the gun was on the ground, making the sound of someone discovering what a broken wrist felt like. The woman was pinned. The math was done. "Walk," Logan said. To the man with the bat, "Take him." A nod at the one on the ground. The man with the bat looked at the woman. She gave him a small, tight nod. A concession, not a defeat, the face of someone already planning what comes next. He came off the wall and got the injured man under the arm and moved him toward the entrance. Logan let the woman's wrist go and stepped back. She picked up her knife from the ground and sheathed it without breaking eye contact. There was something cold in her that Logan noted. She wasn't scared the way the others were scared. She was recalculating. "You could have killed us," she said. "Could have," Logan agreed. "Why didn't you?" "You're not the point," he said. She held that for a moment, then walked out. Logan followed them as far as the entrance and stopped there. The two men were already moving Cal toward the car. Dex didn't look back. The engine turned over, gravel under tires, taillights going red and then gone. He stood in the parking lot for a while after. The night was clear enough for stars, the kind of sky you only got when there were no city lights left for 100 miles in any direction. He looked at his right hand, a thin line across the back of his knuckles, where the woman's jacket buckle had caught him when he pinned her. Already closing. Pink going to nothing. He made a fist, released it, and went back inside. The woman's name was Dex, though that detail belonged only to the people who knew her. The man with the broken wrist was named Cal. And he said nothing during the drive, except to breathe through his teeth every time the car hit a rut in the road. The man with the bat drove. The fourth one, the one who'd held the walker, sat in the back with Cal and looked out the window. Dex sat in the passenger seat and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "He let us go." "Yeah," the driver said. "That's not nothing." She was quiet again. Then, "He could have had us. He had us already. He chose to stop." "Maybe he didn't want the noise," the driver said. "Maybe," Dex said. But she didn't sound like she believed it. She sounded like someone adding a number to a column she'd been keeping for a while and not liking where the total was going. They drove another 20 minutes to a cluster of buildings on a county road. A farm operation that had been converted to something more functional. Fencing reinforced lights in the windows, a generator running somewhere behind the main structure. The kind of place that meant organization, resources, somebody in charge. Dex got out. Cal was helped out. The driver went to park the car. At the main door, a man she knew as a runner for the outfit that worked the region stepped out and asked what happened. She told him quickly without drama. Bitten and didn't go. Fought 4-1 and didn't break a sweat. Let them walk. The runner listened with his head slightly tilted, the way people tilted their heads when they were deciding if something was worth bringing upstairs. "I need to talk to Grant," Dex said. "Grant's busy." "Not too busy for this," she said. "There's a man out there that doesn't go down. Either we bring him in, or we figure out how to work around him. Either way, Grant needs to know." The runner looked at her for a moment. Then he went inside. Dex leaned against the door frame and lit the short end of a cigarette she'd been saving since the week before. And she thought about the parking lot and the stars and the thin line on the man's knuckles closing over like it had never been there. Some things you filed and forgot. Some things you filed and kept coming back to. This was the second kind. Grant heard the report at 6 in the morning, standing in the converted warehouse that served as his operations center, holding a cup of coffee that had been reheated twice and still tasted like an apology. The runner, a wiry kid named Pryor, who had been with the outfit 8 months and knew better than to editorialize, laid it out in under 2 minutes. Bitten and didn't turn. 4 of Dex's people, 1 casualty. Dex herself with a bruised ego and an intact assessment. The man was real. The man was alone. The man had let them walk. Grant set the cup down. "He alone," he said. "Far as Dex could tell, no sign of a group." "He bleed," Pryor hesitated. "She said there was a scrape, closed up fast." "Did he kill that one, the dead one they brought?" "He kept the rest of us breathing." Grant picked the cup back up, turned it in his hands, set it down again. The warehouse had high ceilings and cold floors and smelled like the diesel fuel they used for the generator and the sweat of 40 people who'd been living inside the same walls for 2 years. Along one wall, shelving units with numbered containers, each one cataloged, each one tracked. Along another, a row of vehicles, 3 trucks, a flatbed, 2 motorcycles maintained weekly. This was what 20 months of discipline looked like. Not power, infrastructure. "He let them walk," Grant said again. Not a question, turning it over. "Yes." "That's interesting." He moved to the shelving wall, ran one finger along a container edge without looking at it, thinking. "A man who can't die and chooses not to kill. That's not a threat. That's an asset." Pryor said nothing, which was the right call. "Find him," Grant said. "Quiet. Don't shoot at him. Don't threaten. Invite." He paused. "And tell Dex she did well. She didn't panic." Pryor left. Grant stood in the warehouse and drank the bad coffee and thought about the shape of the thing. They found Logan 2 days later on a stretch of county road, moving north on foot, carrying nothing but what fit in a canvas bag worn across one shoulder. The team Grant sent was 4 people, a talker named Sessler, who had the gift of sounding reasonable in unreasonable situations. 2 others who stayed back in quiet, and a 4th in a vehicle parked 200 yards up the road. Standard configuration, pressure without display. Sessler pulled the car alongside Logan and rolled the window down and said they had food and a place to sleep and an offer worth hearing. Logan kept walking. Sessler drove alongside at walking pace and said the offer came from someone with resources and serious intentions. Logan kept walking. "At least hear it," Sessler said. Logan stopped. Sessler took that as an invitation and got out of the car. Up close, he was good at his job. The right amount of eye contact, hands. Visible voice calibrated to convey sincerity without servility. He said his employer had heard about a man with a particular set of qualities. Said the world needed people like that. Said there was a community, a structure, fair exchange. "What kind of exchange?" Logan said. "Protection work. Running point. You've got capabilities most people don't. We have supply lines, medical safe walls. You contribute what you can, we provide what you need." Logan looked at him for a moment. The sky behind Sessler was overcast, the light flat and gray, and the road ahead curved into tree line. He could smell the 2 people hanging back, nervous sweat gun oil, the synthetic fabric of tactical gear that hadn't been washed in a week. He could smell the vehicle up the road. Engine still warm. "Who's your employer?" Logan said. "Goes by Grant. Runs the largest stable operation in the region. 30 miles of active trade routes, 4 outposts, 200. And some people who eat regularly because of how he set things up." "And what does Grant want from me?" Sessler gave him the smile of a man who'd been told exactly how much to say. "Come see, that's all. Come talk to him. You don't like what you hear, you leave." Logan looked at the tree line, then back at Sessler. "All right," he said. The facility was the farm complex Dex had returned to, expanded and repurposed beyond what its original builders would have recognized. The main building, a processing warehouse, held the operations center, the armory, and Grant's quarters. Behind it, 4 smaller structures used for storage, a vehicle bay, and what the people inside called the holding rooms, which was a cleaner name than what the rooms actually were. Grant met Logan in the operations center with the overhead lights on, and the shelving wall behind him, and 30 feet of open floor between them, which was a deliberate choice. He was taller than Sessler, broader across the shoulders, with the kind of stillness that came from spending years making other people wait. He wore a dark jacket, no weapon visible, which meant the weapon was there, but Grant wanted Logan watching his face instead. The layout was deliberate too. Armory to the left, interior door visible at the far end, vehicles through the bay window. Grant had learned that people who could see the whole machine were faster to understand. They were already inside it. "You're real," Grant said. The tone was assessment, not greeting. "So far," Logan said. "Dex said you moved fast. Said the healing was genuine." Grant studied him the way you studied a piece of equipment you were thinking about acquiring. "I'm not a man who operates on rumor. But I'm also not a man who ignores useful information when it walks through my door." "I didn't walk through your door," Logan said. "I was collected." "Invited," Grant said. The correction was smooth. "There's a difference. Depends on what happens if I want to leave." Grant almost smiled. "Nothing happens. You're not a prisoner." He moved to the side, gestured at the room, the shelving, the vehicles visible through the bay door, the general machinery of the operation. "This is what organization looks like. You've been out there on the road. You've seen what no organization looks like. I'm offering you the better option." "What does the better option cost?" "Your participation," Grant said. "We have routes that need running, entry points that need clearing, communities that are slow to understand the benefits of cooperation." He paused. "A man who doesn't go down changes the math on a lot of problems." Logan took in the shelving wall. Numbered containers, a clipboard on a hook, a padlock on the armory door that was new, the metal still bright. His attention moved to the bay door and the vehicles beyond, then settled on the interior door at the far end of the room. No label, a guard beside it doing a poor job of looking like something else. "What's through there?" Logan said. Grant's expression didn't change. "Storage." "What kind?" "Supplies, equipment." A beat. "Leverage." The last word was careful. Honest in a way Grant probably calculated as useful, a small show of candor to buy credibility. Logan noted it and noted what it meant. "I'll pass," Logan said. The temperature of the room changed in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Grant's stillness shifted from composed to held. "That's a short deliberation," Grant said. "Didn't need a long one." "What's the objection?" Logan fixed on him. "You want a weapon. I'm not a weapon." "I want a partner," Grant said. "With mutual benefit." "You want something you own." Logan moved toward the exit. "Those aren't the same thing." 2 people stepped into the doorway he was heading for. Not aggressive, just present. The visual grammar of a closed option. Logan stopped. He clocked the 2 in the doorway, then Grant. "Last chance to make this easy." Grant said, and his voice had shed the reasonable register entirely. Underneath it was something older and colder. You don't have to like it. You just have to function. That's what Weapon X said, Logan said quietly. It wasn't for Grant. It wasn't for anyone in the room. Then, he moved. Shit, not toward the doorway. Toward the armory. The lock was new, but the hasp was old, screwed into frame that had been there since the building was a working farm, and Logan put one claw through the hasp bracket and pulled, and the whole assembly came out of the wood in a single motion. He was inside before the two at the doorway had fully processed the direction change. The armory was 12 feet by 8 shelved, floor-to-ceiling ammunition in plastic tubs, weapons racked and zip-tied, a crate of radio equipment fuel cans stacked in the corner. One shelf held field medical bandages, antiseptic, a sealed bag of suture strips. Logan registered it and moved past it. He put a claw through the fuel cans, not puncture lateral tear, and let the contents run across the concrete toward the electrical panel on the back wall. Then he yanked the main breaker on his way to the door. The overhead lights cut out. Emergency strips along the floor stuttered on dim orange, enough to see by and not enough to work by. "Don't light anything in there," he said to the room. The two at the doorway were now inside the room, having come in behind him. Grant was at the armory door. 3 others had materialized from the far entrance, the one that led to the vehicle bay. Logan walked past all of them, toward the interior door, the one with no label. "Don't," Grant said. Logan opened it. The holding rooms were 3 converted stalls, each with a padlocked bolt on the outside. 2 were occupied. A woman in the first sitting against the back wall who looked up without expression, the face of someone who had stopped expecting doors to open in their favor. A man in the second, older, asleep or close to it, a chain around his ankle, bolted to a ring set in the concrete floor. Logan looked at the chain, at the ring, at the bolt. He put 2 claws through the chain 6 inches from the ankle cuff and pulled in opposite directions. The links separated. The man startled awake and stared. "Can you walk?" Logan said. "Yes." He did the same for the padlock on the woman's stall, 1 claw through the shackle pressure done. She stood and moved out without being told. Behind Logan, Grant's voice came flat and controlled through the doorway. "You're burning down 8 months of work." "Your work," Logan said, not turning. "Not theirs." He moved back through the operations center with both people behind him, and no one in the room made a move. Not because they couldn't, but because the armory floor was still running and the main breaker was dead, and nobody wanted to be the one who found out what a spark in there cost. He got them through the side exit into the gray morning, passing through the vehicle bay on the way. He didn't slow down. 2 quick passes along the engine housings of the nearest trucks, not loud, not dramatic, just final. And then they were outside. The woman's name was Petra. She'd been held 6 weeks, brought in from a community 2 settlements east that hadn't agreed fast enough to Grant's terms. She said this quickly, as if speed of delivery was the only way to make sure she got to say it at all. The older man said nothing. He walked with a slight hitch in his left leg from the ankle cuff and kept his eyes on the tree line the whole way out, like he needed to confirm it was staying where it was. Logan left them at this county road with directions to the nearest trading post 2 miles east, the container triangle, neutral ground. The older man stopped once on the walk out and pressed 2 fingers against his ankle cuff scar, without seeming to notice he was doing it, then kept moving. Petra asked where Logan was going. He said north. She asked if he was coming back. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Inside the facility, Grant stood in the armory doorway and looked at the spreading stain across the floor. Sessler was beside him. The 2 from the holding rooms had gone after the people Logan released. Though Grant had already made the calculation that chasing them was a waste of resources he could not currently afford to waste, not with the armory compromised, and 2 vehicles in the bay that Logan had put claw marks through the engine blocks of on his way out the side exit. Sessler said something careful about regrouping. Grant didn't respond immediately. He was thinking about the holding rooms and the people who weren't in them anymore, and what that meant for the 3 communities whose compliance had been built on the assumption that non-compliance had consequences. He was thinking about how quickly that assumption would travel, and how much faster it would travel than his ability to rebuild it. "He didn't take anything," Sessler said. "No," Grant said. "He could have." "That's the point." Grant turned from the doorway. His voice was level, but the stillness was gone, replaced by something tighter, the particular tension of a man recalculating from scratch. "He's not building anything. He's just taking apart what other people built." A pause. "Find out what he's afraid of. Not what hurts him. What he won't walk away from." Sessler made a note and left. Grant stared at the armory floor for another moment. Then his attention moved to the passage that led to the empty holding rooms, held there, briefly, then shifted to the county road beyond the window, and finally to the gray tree line north where the road curved out of sight. Somewhere in that direction, if the reports coming in from the outer settlements were accurate, there were people who moved through the dead like they were part of it. People who used the herds the way other people used walls. Grant thought about that for a while. Then he went to find a phone that worked. The first wrong thing was the direction. Logan had been moving north through pine scrub for 2 hours, following a fire road that had mostly gone back to nature, grass splitting the asphalt saplings, pushing through cracks. The kind of slow reclamation that happened when nothing maintained anything for 6 years. The dead drifted through these woods without plan or destination, pulled by sound and smell, and nothing else. He'd passed 3 of them, and the last mile gave them wide berth, kept moving. The 4th one was different. It was moving toward something. Not the lurching drift, not the head swing tracking of a sound source. This one had a bearing. It crossed the fire road 30 yards ahead of him, threading between 2 trees with a deliberateness that sat wrong against everything Logan knew about how they operated. He stopped and watched it go. A pine branch dipped on his left, then settled. No wind. Then he smelled it. Under the rot, which was front and center, inescapable the baseline of everything out here, there was something else. Sweat recent and human. The faint iron of dried blood old enough to be days. And beneath that, almost buried the petrochemical sharpness of a blade that had been oiled and wiped but not washed, carried close to skin for a long time. Logan stood very still. He counted 4 distinct human scent signatures in the surrounding tree line, spaced irregularly, advancing at the pace of the dead. Their feet dragged on purpose. He could hear the difference, the deliberate scrape versus the involuntary shuffle. He couldn't see them. He didn't need to. He knew what they were. He kept walking north. Same pace. Nothing in his posture changed. But the group he'd been loosely tracking since the county road, a family unit. 2 adults and 3 children, one of them, an infant someone was carrying in a sling, had stopped in a clearing about a 1/4 mile ahead to rest. Logan had clocked them an hour back. Maintained distance hadn't approached. They weren't his business. He didn't collect people. But the herd was moving toward them. He could hear it now, the low aggregate sound of many bodies, the rhythmic shuffle that built in the distance like weather coming in. Whichever direction the people in the skins were pushing from, they'd angled the mass northeast, directly into the clearing where the family had stopped. Logan cut off the fire road and went through the brush at an angle fast and low, circling wide of the nearest scent signature in the trees. He came out of the scrub at the edge of the clearing, and the woman who'd been feeding the infant scrambled backward, and the man with her brought up a shotgun. "Lower it," Logan said, already moving past them. "You need to go. North-northeast, stay off the fire road." "What's heard?" "Coming from the south. You've got maybe 4 minutes." He scanned the clearing. 3 kids, 1 infant, 1 functional adult with a weapon, 1 who was currently frozen, a dog tied to a pack frame that had started whining. "Move! The dog, too." The man with the shotgun made a decision in under 2 seconds, the kind of decision that only took that long, when things had been bad for a while and you'd practiced trusting fast reads. He got the frozen woman moving, the kids followed, and they were out the north side of the clearing in under a minute. Logan went south. The fire road narrowed a 1/4 mile back to where it crossed a low concrete bridge over a drainage culvert, the span barely wide enough for a single vehicle. On both sides of the bridge, steep gravel embankment dropping 6 feet to the culvert bed. The railing on the east side had rusted through and collapsed. The west rail held, but was bent gaps wide enough to fall through if you weren't careful. The herd would have to cross here to continue northeast. There was no other route that didn't add significant distance. The culvert ran 50 yards in both directions before it hit terrain too rough for the dead to navigate efficiently. They'd funnel through the bridge. Logan stood in the middle of the span and waited. He could hear them before he could see them, a wave of sound that had texture depth, the particular density of a large mass moving through brush without caring about the brush. The tree line at the south end of the fire road began to shift and break as the leading edge came through, and he watched the gaps between them. Their second rank right side. A figure moving with too much economy. Arms carried slightly forward, not dangling, head orientation too deliberate. He caught the scent again, stronger now. A human body wrapped in something dead up close, an overwhelming layering of decay over something living and warm. The figure glanced at him, just for a half second, and in the wrong direction for a dead thing, which had no concept of him as a specific entity worth orienting toward. Logan held eye contact with it. "Human," he said quietly. The figure looked away, resumed the drift, kept moving with the mass. The herd hit the south end of the bridge and began to compress through the gap, and Logan set his feet. The first minute was manageable. The bridge was narrow enough that they came through in rough columns of 2, and Logan worked the front rank redirect step. Redirect, hands on shoulders, turning them sideways so they fell against each other, creating friction, slowing the push. He didn't use the claws. Claws meant killing, and killing made sound, and sound pulled everything within a 1/4 mile. He wasn't here to win. He was here to hold. The second minute was harder. The pressure from behind built as the full mass hit the bottleneck, and the dead didn't feel fatigue, didn't feel pain, didn't recalculate when a tactic wasn't working. They just kept coming. Logan caught a grab at his left arm, broke the grip, took an elbow to the jaw from a redirect that went wrong. Felt his footing shift on the concrete where something had made the surface slick. He hit the bent west rail with his shoulder, felt it give, partially caught himself. A hand closed on the back of his collar and pulled. He went down to one knee, 3 of them, on him at once, the weight real and distributed and not something he could simply shrug. Teeth found his right forearm pressure, the particular grinding insistence of it. He felt the skin give. He got a hand free, put a palm against the nearest skull and shoved, gained 6 inches, got the knee up and pushed off the concrete. He stood. The wound on his forearm was already doing what it did. He didn't look at it. He reached into the mass and grabbed the nearest upright and threw it sideways off the bridge into the culvert bed. Then the next one. He wasn't redirecting. Now he was carving, making space, putting them where they couldn't contribute to the pressure. The claws stayed in. The noise had to stay low. Somewhere above him, in the trees, he heard a sound that wasn't wind and wasn't dead. A short exhale controlled the kind of breath you made when you were watching something you hadn't expected to see. He filed it and kept working. 3 minutes. Maybe 3.5. Then the pressure shifted. The mass behind the bridge was beginning to redistribute the southern half of the herd, splitting around, an obstacle he couldn't see, something redirecting them east and west of the fire road rather than straight through. He felt the push across the bridge ease by degrees the way a current eased when something diverted upstream. The people in the skins were changing the angle. Logan stepped back to the north end of the bridge and put his back against the rail and let the remaining dead drift past him without engaging, conserving the gap. 40 seconds, maybe 50, and the last of the leading mass was across and moving northeast. Not toward the family. They'd had enough of a head start, and the herd's angle had shifted east, away from the route Logan had sent them. He waited until the tail of the herd had cleared the bridge before he moved. He found the family unit half a mile north, stopped at the edge of a field where the scrub gave way to open ground. The woman with the infant was sitting on a pack, nursing. The man with the shotgun was watching the tree line. The 3 kids were in various states of post-sprint recovery, one crouching with hands on knees, one sitting flat, one standing very close to the adult woman's back. The dog had stopped whining. It pressed against the man's leg and watched the same tree line he was watching. Logan came out of the scrub at an angle they could see him from 15 yards out and stopped there. The man with the shotgun tracked him. "They're past," Logan said. "Herd went east." The man held the gun up for another moment, then lowered it. He was breathing through his mouth, the shallow, controlled breathing of someone who'd been running longer than was comfortable. "What was that back there?" he said. Not quite a question. "Herd management," Logan said. "That's not what I'm asking." Logan didn't answer that. He scanned the tree line behind the family, the field ahead, the western approach. Clean. The trading post is about 4 miles east. Container set up at the crossroads. Neutral ground. "I know it," the man said. "Go there. Tell them what you saw." A pause. "All of it. If nobody knows, they die the same way." The man held on him for a moment, reading that instruction. He was smart enough to hear what it meant. Someone's driving those things. "Someone's been driving them for a while," Logan said. "People need to know that." He turned back toward the fire road. "Hey," the man's voice came after him. "You got bit. Back there, I saw your arm." Logan kept walking. "I saw your arm close," the man called. His voice had shifted, not aggressive. Something more unsettled. "What are you—" The tree line took Logan without an answer. He stopped about a mile in off the fire road, in a stand of pines dense enough to kill the wind. He pushed up his right sleeve and ran his thumb along the forearm. Skin sealed the tenderness already fading to background. He pressed harder. Still there, but less. By morning, it would be nothing. He pulled the sleeve back down. The exhale he'd heard from the trees during the bridge sequence, controlled, deliberate, someone watching, had come from the northeast quadrant above and outside the herd mass. A whisperer who'd moved out of position to observe. Which meant Rowan, or someone close to her, had watched the whole thing. Had seen what the bridge held. Had seen what Logan did and what Logan survived. They hadn't moved on him directly, which told him something about how they calculated risk. They didn't fight things they couldn't put down. They rerouted. Logan considered that. He sat with his back against a pine and listened to the woods settle. Somewhere south, the herd was moving east, dispersing, losing cohesion without the directional pressure to hold it together. The people in the skins would let it go. Herds were resources, not armies. You didn't spend them on things that didn't spend. The family would reach the trading post by nightfall. They'd tell what they saw the man with the arm. that closed standing in the middle of the bridge while the dead came across. They'd also tell what they almost didn't survive, a herd moving wrong with purpose with people in it. That second piece of information mattered more. Logan had been circulating in this region for weeks, and the rumor about him was already reshaping behavior. The rumor about Rowan's people would do the same thing faster because it was a different kind of fear. He was one variable. They were a method scaled. He didn't know yet what Rowan wanted from him. She'd had a clear angle for observation today and hadn't taken it. That meant she was gathering information, not committing. Patient. Smart in the way cold people were smart. He thought about the exhale. Controlled. Watching. He'd have to assume she knew where he was going, which meant she'd be ahead of him. Whatever was north, she'd already thought about how to use it. Logan closed his eyes and listened to the pines for a few minutes. Then he got up and went north. The fire road stretched ahead of him, quiet the tree line on both sides, holding whatever it held. The wind moved through the canopy above without urgency. Somewhere behind him at the trading post, a man with a shotgun was going to walk through the container entrance and ask for whoever was in charge. And he was going to say, the dead weren't the worst thing in that herd. The man with the shotgun arrived at the trading post 40 minutes before dark and said what he'd seen. And by the time the generator cut in and the container lights blinked to life, the story had already split into 3 versions. The first version there was a man who couldn't die from a bite, and if someone could find him and study him, it might save everyone. The second version, there was a man drawing attention wherever he went, and the last place you wanted something like that was inside your walls. The third version, quieter, passed between the people who ran things. There was a man with qualities worth acquiring, and the question was not whether to try, but how. Nobody asked the man with the shotgun what he wanted. He sat on a crate near the south container and drank water someone handed him and watched the argument happen without him. By morning, a runner had left for the settlement 3 miles northwest. The settlement had a name. Bellhaven. Someone had painted it on a plywood board nailed to the gatepost, and it had walls, a generator, a population of 60-some people, and the specific tension of a place that had been functional long enough to develop internal politics. The gate was reinforced steel on a rolling track. The inner perimeter had watchtowers, 2 of them, staffed in rotation. There was a medical bay in the southeast corner of the main building, run by a woman named Ellen, who had been a hospital administrator before the world changed and who had carried that administrative precision into everything she did after. Logan reached the gate at mid-morning. He hadn't planned to stop. He'd been tracking a supply route north, and Bellhaven sat at a road junction he needed to pass through. He'd have gone around, except that the eastern bypass had flooded sometime in the last season, and the detour added half a day. He stood at the gate and looked at the watchtower, and the watchtower looked back at him. "We have food," said the man at the gate intercom. A speaker, jury-rigged, still working. "Medical. We're not hostile." Logan considered the flooded bypass. "One night," he said. The gate rolled open. He knew within the first hour that the 3 versions of the story had arrived before him. He could feel it in the way people positioned themselves, some angling toward him with the particular body language of people who wanted to get close to something they decided was important, others keeping distance with the careful non-eye contact of people who had already decided he was a problem and were waiting for someone else to act on it. A woman followed him from the gate to the main building at 40 yards, stopped when he stopped, moved when he moved. She wasn't subtle about it. Ellen met him in the main building's common area with water and a plate of food and a smile that was professionally warm, and told him nothing about what was underneath it. "We heard about the bridge," she said. "What you did for the Carver family." "Word travels," Logan said. It does. She sat across from him, hands folded, the posture of someone running a meeting. We've also heard other things. Things that are harder to process. About the bite? Yes. She let the word sit. I'm a medical professional. Or I was. The implications of what's being described, if accurate, are significant. For everyone. A pause carefully waited. I'd like to understand it better. Logan ate. The food was real cooked, seasoned, actual calories. He filed that and kept eating. I'm not a specimen, he said. I'm not suggesting that, Ellen said. I'm suggesting a conversation. If there's something in your physiology that resists infection, and we could understand it, the applications would be significant. Voluntary, Logan said. Flat. Of course. He looked at her hands, folded still, the kind of stillness that came from practice. You already know it won't work that way, he said. Whatever you think you're going to find. Ellen's expression didn't shift. That was its own answer. He finished eating. She refilled his water without being asked, which was either hospitality or distraction, and he let it be both. The meeting happened in the common area later that afternoon, which was not what Ellen had planned. She'd wanted something smaller, more controlled. But word of Logan's presence had moved through the settlement fast, and by mid-afternoon, there were 40 people in the space, and the three versions of the story were being argued simultaneously in different corners. A man named Tomas stood near the east wall and spoke loudly enough to be heard, without technically addressing anyone they didn't know. What this person was. They didn't know what he carried. They didn't know if the rules that applied to everyone else applied to him. And bringing unknowns inside the walls was how settlements died. A few people near him nodded. More stayed quiet, which in gatherings like this meant they were waiting to see which way the weight shifted. On the other side of the floor, a younger woman said that if even a fraction of what was being described was real, they had a moral obligation to understand it because people were dying every day from bites that didn't have to be fatal. Moral obligation, Tomas said without looking at her. Yes, she said. Moral obligation doesn't feed 60 people. Ellen let it run for another few minutes, then stood and said that no decisions would be made that evening, that their guest was there voluntarily and would be treated as such, and that she'd be grateful if everyone would keep that in mind. The crowd didn't disperse so much as redistribute, people pulling toward corners, reconfiguring into smaller arguments. Logan sat near the south wall and said nothing. He watched the floor, the way he watched tree lines. Not any single point, but the pattern of it, the weight distribution, where the energy was, and which direction it was pulling. He watched Ellen work the crowd after her announcement. She touched 3 people on the arm briefly, each time leaning in to say something quiet. All 3 were people who'd been arguing for cooperation. After the third one, Logan had a clearer picture of how the space was organized and who was organizing it. He went to the medical bay. The medical bay was in the southeast corner, accessed through a corridor off the main building. Ellen had offered it, for the night quiet, a cot better than the common floor. Logan had said he'd think about it. He went because he wanted to see the layout, and because the layout was the thing. The bay was 12 feet by 16. One door, the corridor door's standard hinged decent latch. A second door he'd clocked on the way, a narrower opposite wall leading to what smelled like a supply closet. One window high and small wire mesh over the glass. 2 cots. Shelving along the north wall, an IV stand collapsed leaning. And in the supply closet door, a keyhole on the outside. He stood there for a moment. Then he crossed to the supply closet and checked the hinges. Both interior, both accessible. He noted that and went back to the corridor. Tomas was in the hallway. Arms crossed, weight back, the posture of someone who had decided to be an obstacle. "You're in the medical bay," Tomas said. "Seems that way," Logan said. "Ellen put you there?" "She offered." I took a look. Tomas's jaw was tight. He was afraid Logan could smell it, the sour, sharp edge of it. But he was also one of those people for whom fear expressed as aggression, because the alternative was to admit the fear. "You shouldn't be inside these walls, we'd be on a mezzo," he said. "Whatever you are." "I'm standing in a hallway," Logan said. "Same as you." He went back to the common area and found a corner away from the main clusters and sat with his back to the wall. He didn't sleep. They came at 4 in the morning. Ellen and 2 others, a heavy-set man Logan didn't know, and a younger one who moved like he had medical training with the precise economy of someone used to working under pressure. They came into the medical bay where they believed Logan to be sleeping, and Logan was sitting on the cot with his eyes open. Ellen stopped in the doorway. The 2 men stopped behind her. "Something wrong," Logan said. "We wanted to check on you," Ellen said. She recovered fast, he'd give her that. "You've been through a lot. We thought at 4 in the morning." Silence. He could smell what the younger man was carrying before he could see it, the sharp synthetic bite of concentrated sedative. A syringe already drawn, the cap already off. The heavy-set man had something in his other hand, a second dose, a backup, or a restraint. Logan put it together in under a second and stayed sitting. "Put it away," he said. Ellen said his name, or tried to what she thought was his name from the rumors, and started a sentence about medical necessity and the good of the community. And Logan stood up. The younger man moved. He was fast-trained and committed to the angle, a good approach cornering Logan between the cot and the wall. Logan caught his wrist with his left hand before the syringe covered the last 6 inches, held the wrist with enough pressure to freeze the arm without breaking anything, and stood there. "I said put it away." The man tried to pull free. Logan increased the pressure 2 degrees, not enough to injure, enough to communicate the available range. The syringe dropped. "There are children in this building," Logan said. He wasn't looking at Ellen. He was looking at the corridor behind her, and the heavy-set man who was now blocking it, and the door at the other end of the room that led to the supply closet. "I'm going to leave through the supply corridor. Nobody's going to follow me. And nobody in this room is going to get hurt." "You can't," Ellen started. "I can, Logan said. "I'm choosing not to." He released the younger man's wrist and stepped back. "That's the difference." He crossed to the supply closet. The door was locked from the outside, but the hinges were inside, and he put one claw through the lower hinge pin and pulled up, then the upper, and the door came free on the lock side, and he moved it aside and stepped into the closet. The supply closet had a second exit, a loading door padlocked, and the padlock was a 4-year-old master model whose shackle gave in under 10 seconds. Then, he was in a narrow external passage between the medical building and the perimeter wall, and the perimeter wall had a maintenance ladder, and the maintenance ladder put him on the walkway, and from the walkway he dropped to the ground outside. He stood in the pre-dawn gray and listened. No alarm, they'd wanted this quiet, which meant they'd keep it quiet now too, because raising an alarm meant explaining what they'd tried. The North Tower was dark. Whoever had been on rotation had been pulled into the 4 a.m. job or told to look elsewhere. Either way, the gate's manual release was on the inside of the guard booth, and the booth was empty. He found the supply locker in the main building storage corridor in 4 minutes. It was padlocked. He broke the lock. Found the sedative stock, 6 prepared syringes in a foam case, a bottle of the concentrate, 2 more empties, and ran the utility tap for 2 seconds. Watched the floor drain, take it clean, then emptied every syringe into it. He left the concentrate. They needed it for legitimate use. He left a claw mark across the outside of the foam case, one clean line so they'd know the rest of the stock had been counted. Then he found the holding cell. It was at the back of the secondary building, a converted storage space with a bolt on the outside and no window. Empty now, but the floor had marks, scuff patterns from repeated foot traffic in a confined area, a ring bolt set in the wall. The smell of people kept without adequate ventilation over weeks. Logan stood in it for a moment. He pulled the ring bolt out of the wall. It took about 4 seconds. He put it in his jacket pocket. Then he walked to the gate, pulled the manual release, and left. By the time the settlement's morning shift started, at 6, 3 things had happened. The sedative supply had been compromised. The holding room's anchor point was gone, and Logan was not inside the walls. Tomas found out first. He stood in the holding cell and stared at the hole in the wall where the ring bolt had been and said something that wasn't quite a word. Then he went to find Ellen. Ellen was in the bay, the supply closet door still leaning against the frame where Logan had set it. She was on the cot, and her face had the expression of someone running a calculation that wasn't producing the result they'd expected. He knew, Tomas said. He knew what we were going to do. Yes? Ellen said. Before we did it. Yes. Tomas stood in the doorway for a moment. The settlement was waking up around them, voices in the common area, the generator cycling up, a child somewhere asking for breakfast. What do we tell people? He said. Ellen took in the cot. The supply closet, the claw mark on the corridor wall beside the door, one clean line at shoulder height that she hadn't noticed until now. We tell them the truth, she said. He was here and he left. That's not all of it. No, she said. It's not. The full story moved through the settlement by noon. Not all of it, Ellen's version, was edited, but enough. And the parts that moved fastest were not about Logan's healing or Logan's claws or the failed sedation. The part that moved fastest was what he'd left behind the ring, bolt gone from the holding room wall. The drain with the sedative washed down it, and the foam case with one clean mark across it that said, I counted what you had. By afternoon, 3 people from the settlement's harder faction, the ones who'd been nodding along with Tomas, the ones who ran the holding room, had a quiet conversation near the vehicle shed. They talked about resources, about autonomy, about the problem with centralized leadership when leadership made mistakes. They talked about setting up something separate with cleaner rules. By nightfall, they were making a list. The settlement didn't break that day, but the crack ran through it, and everyone who walked across that floor could feel the give. Outside the walls on the county road, heading north, Logan walked with his hands in his pockets and the ring bolt heavy against his hip. He'd taken it so they couldn't put it back that morning, maybe the next morning either. The hole in the wall was the point, not the bolt, but what was missing from it. He kept it anyway. He walked until the settlement's generator hum faded behind him, until the road opened into flat gray distance, until there was nothing ahead but morning. 3 weeks after Bellhaven, the story had changed again. It wasn't he heals anymore, though. That part persisted. It wasn't even he fights that had been common knowledge since the county road incident. What moved fastest now was the rule, the condensed version that people passed between themselves at water points and supply drops and the edges of fires when they thought no one important was listening. Don't chain people. That's how you call him. Nobody knew exactly where the phrase started. It had the worn quality of something passed through many mouths, smoothed down by repetition until only the useful shape remained. Whether it was literally true, whether Logan had some systematic awareness of every bolt and lock in a 50-mile radius, was a question most people had stopped asking. The question that mattered was simpler. Is it worth finding out? For most groups, the answer had become no. For the ones still asking, Logan had a way of providing an answer. The first time that month was a checkpoint on a county road junction. 3 men and a woman operating a toll system pay in food, medicine, or labor, or your vehicle and supplies became community property and you walked. Standard extraction. They'd been running it for 6 weeks and had graduated to keeping 2 people in a locked storage container behind the checkpoint as incentive for communities downstream. Logan came through, going north, saw the setup from 200 yards, on a slight rise, read it in about 10 seconds, and circled around through the adjacent field. Their eyes lived on the road. Nobody watched the field. He didn't go in through the checkpoint. He went in through the back. The container was a standard 20-footer, padlocked, a breathing hole punched near the top with something rough. 2 people inside, he could hear them, the held breath stillness of people who had been making themselves small for a long time. A man and a teenage boy. The lock was a chain and padlock system wrapped around the door handle and a welded bracket. 1 claw through the chain link's leverage and the chain separated. He opened the container. The man inside blinked against the daylight. The boy was behind him, not visible yet. "Doors open," Logan said. "Field to the west. Stay low." He didn't wait to watch them go. He moved along the container's side toward the checkpoint structure, a plywood and corrugated metal shed generator, running a folding table with a ledger, and went through the back wall where a sheet of corrugated metal had been loosely screwed into a frame. 1 pull. The screw stripped and the panel came away. Inside the ledger, a crate of confiscated goods, 2 rifles on hooks, a radio. Logan took the rifles off the hooks and bent each barrel against the edge of the table. Not broken, bent. Usable for hitting someone, not for shooting. One of the 3 men outside said something. Movement near the front of the structure. Logan put the bent rifles back on the hooks, picked up the ledger, and dropped it in the generator's fuel intake. The generator coughed and died. Then he went back out through the panel gap and into the field. Behind him, he heard the checkpoint crew discover the dark, the dead radio, the container door hanging open, the ledger gone. He heard the silence that came after the held kind when people were recalculating whether their operation was still viable. He was 200 yards into the field before anyone came around the back of the shed. The second time was in a town called Merrick, a crossroads community that had organized itself around a hardware store and a water treatment facility that still partially worked. Merrick had its own internal power structure, and part of that structure had recently started running a secondary operation, collecting individuals with useful skills and holding them in the hardware store's basement under a point system that was labor bondage with paperwork. Logan heard about it at a food distribution point 12 miles south, a woman who'd gotten out 2 weeks prior, walking with the flat-eyed efficiency of someone who never stopped checking over her shoulder. She didn't ask for help. She was describing what she'd left the way people described things they needed to put outside themselves. Logan listened and didn't comment. And when she finished, he asked 2 questions. How many people were being held, and was there a guard rotation? She answered both. Then she looked at him properly for the first time and said, "You're him?" "Which him?" Logan said. She didn't answer that. She pulled her coat tighter and kept walking south. Logan went north to Merrick. The hardware store basement had 6 people a guard at the top of the stairs and a padlocked door at the bottom. The guard was a problem only in that he was in the way. He wasn't the architect of the system, and Logan had no interest in making an example of someone who was following instructions. He came in through the hardware store's loading dock at 3 in the morning, found the guard asleep in a chair at the top of the stairs. 6-hour shifts, the padlock downstairs doing the work the man was too tired to do, and went down the stairs without waking him. The padlock at the bottom was an afterthought, the kind you bought in bulk. It gave in 4 seconds. The 6 people in the basement were awake. People in that situation often didn't sleep well. "Is there another exit?" Logan said to the room quiet. A woman near the back pointed. A window ground level with boards screwed over it from the outside. Logan crossed, put both palms flat against the boards, and pushed. The screws pulled through the wood with a series of small pops. He set the boards aside. "Go," he said. They went. He counted them through 5 adults, 1 teenager moving fast and low across the loading dock and into the alley behind. He left the basement door standing open and the padlock on the floor and the boards leaning against the hardware store's back wall, because the next person who came down those stairs in the morning would see exactly what had happened, and there was a kind of message in that arrangement that didn't require any words. He didn't go looking for the people who ran the system. That wasn't the point. The point was that the basement was empty, and the lock was on the floor, and everyone in Merrick who cared would know by 7 in the morning. By afternoon, 2 things had happened. The people running the labor system had a quiet argument about whether to rebuild, and the argument had fractured into 3 positions, none of which had enough support to move forward. By nightfall, the basement was still empty. Logan was 30 miles north of Merrick, by then moving along a highway overpass with the last of the day's light behind him. The 3rd time was different, and he knew it was different before he understood why. He'd been following a scent trail wood smoke diesel, the specific chemical edge of fear sweat, the kind that came from sustained stress rather than acute fright, for about 2 miles when he found the camp. 8 people, a decent fire, going enough supplies to suggest they'd been moving for a few days with a plan. Nothing wrong on the surface. He watched from the tree line for 20 minutes. What he was waiting to see, he wasn't entirely sure. The camp's composition felt off, in a way that his nose confirmed before his eyes did. The adults were clustered on one side of the fire, and on the other side were 3 children sitting together, not integrated into the group, with the careful body language of people who had learned to take up minimum space. Not a family, a cargo. Logan had been wrong before. He waited another 10 minutes to be sure. Then one of the adults, a heavy-set man in a green jacket, crossed to the children's side and spoke to them at low volume, and whatever he said made the smallest of the 3 pull her knees up and turn her face away. Logan came out of the tree line. He didn't come in fast. He walked at normal pace, making enough noise to be heard, and by the time he reached the edge of the firelight, 4 of the 8 adults were on their feet. "Passing through," Logan said. He stopped at the fire's edge, visible hands at his sides. "Saw the fire." The heavy-set man in the green jacket had come back around to the adult's side. He was measuring Logan with the expression of someone running a very fast threat assessment and not arriving at a satisfying answer. "There's enough," a woman said, wary, but reflex hospitality, the kind that was hard to kill. "If you haven't eaten?" "I'm good," Logan said. He was watching the children. The smallest one still had her face turned away. The other 2 had fixed on him with the focused attention of kids who had recently learned that strangers arriving at camp could mean a change in their situation, for better or worse. "Whose kids?" Logan said. The question landed differently than a question about the weather. He watched the adult group recalibrate in real time. "Family, kosher," the heavy-set man said. "Which family?" A silence. The fire popped. "Yours," Logan said. The heavy-set man's jaw tightened. "What's it to you?" Logan looked at the 3 children. The smallest had turned back to look at him now. She had the eyes of a kid who had been carried across a lot of bad miles and had stopped expecting any individual adult to be on her side. "It's something," Logan said. What happened next happened fast and without ceremony. The heavy-set man made a decision. He had the numbers, and he'd made worse calculations, and 2 of the men beside him moved together. One going for Logan's arms, one going for the tackle. Logan sidestepped the tackle, caught the other man's jacket lapel, and redirected him into his partner. Both went down in the dirt. He stood there. The remaining 6 hadn't moved yet, still in the window where the math was running. Logan fixed on the heavy-set man. "Walk away from this," Logan said. "Right now, all of you. You leave the kids and you keep walking, and there's nothing else." The heavy-set man stared at the 2 men on the ground, then at Logan. Something crossed his face, not fear exactly, something older. The recognition that this equation had only one answer, and he didn't want to be in the room when it resolved. He left. They all left, not running but not slow either, moving away from the fire and into the dark. Somewhere north of the camp, carried on the wind, came the low, aggregate sound of dead things moving through brush. The group heard it too. That settled the question of whether they'd circle back. Logan sat down at the fire. The 3 children hadn't moved. "You're safe," he said. Which was not entirely true, and they probably knew it. The world was not safe. The fire was not safe. This road was not safe. But for right now, tonight at this fire, they were. He didn't add any of that. He stayed with them until morning, when he flagged down a group heading south who had 2 families with them and enough sense to ask the right questions. He put the 3 children in their care and told them about the trading post at the crossroads, the container triangle neutral ground still operating, and watched them go. Then he turned north again. He stopped that evening on a highway overpass and watched the sunset do what it did to flat country, long shadows. Copper light, everything that was rusted turning briefly gold. He ate something from his bag that didn't deserve the word food and drank water and didn't think about much. Below the overpass on the highway shoulder, 2 men were crouched over something. At first he thought they were eating. Then he saw that what they were crouched over had a shape that was wrong, too deliberate, too arranged, and he leaned on the railing and watched. They were building something. A box structure low to the ground, hinged top gaps between the boards for air. A cage, or close enough. But what stopped him was the bait, a child's backpack recognizable in style positioned in front of the open end. Not for catching walkers, wrong size, wrong placement. He watched for another minute to make sure he was reading it right. He was. He came down off the overpass. The 2 men scattered when they heard him coming. They'd built in an observation window, a practiced setup, and they'd seen him on the bridge above. He didn't chase them. Chasing them in the dark in flat country was a waste of energy, and he wasn't going to catch both. He took the cage apart instead. Systematically, hinges first, then the frame, then the boards, breaking them across his knee and scattering the pieces across the highway in both directions. He picked up the child's backpack, empty, planted just the visual, and threw it into the drainage ditch. Then he stood in the middle of the highway for a moment and thought about what he'd seen. It was bait. But bait for what the cage was too small for adults. Which meant they weren't catching adults. Which meant the shift Grant had started was downstream now. The larger operations had gotten careful, the smaller ones were adapting. And the adaptation was toward targets that couldn't fight back. That was worse. Not different in kind, but worse in gradient. And the setup had been good, practiced with an observation post and a fallback route. Someone had refined this. Someone had iterated. This wasn't hunger. This was design. They were learning. Logan stood on the empty highway for a while longer. The copper light was gone, the sky running from dark orange to deep blue at the edges. Somewhere south, a settlement was making decisions about what to do with an empty holding level. Somewhere west, a checkpoint crew was looking at 2 bent rifle barrels and trying to figure out what came next. The world was still dirty. It was just getting smarter about how. He picked up his bag and walked north. No cages. So they started using kids. The phrase was moving through the region by the time Logan hit the county line, not one phrase exactly, but variations of it, the kind that got compressed into different shapes by different mouths, and all arrived at the same destination. He heard it at a water point from a man who didn't know he was talking to the subject of the story. He heard it again in a different form from a girl of maybe 15 who was traveling alone and who said it the way you said something you'd memorized because it had kept you alive. If you can't chain them, you bait them. She said it as a warning. A new rule to file next to "don't run." You'll just die tired and never sleep in a car with the windows up. Logan asked her where she'd heard it. Everywhere, she said. Recent. He gave her half his water and went north. The town of Crestfield had been a manufacturing suburb, the kind of place that existed as a service node for a larger city, stamped out of the same template as 30 others along the same interstate. The city it had serviced was 40 miles southeast, and no one went there anymore. The dead had claimed it thoroughly enough that even scavengers steered clear. Crestfield itself had a moderate population of maybe 120 survivors, spread across 3 adjacent neighborhoods, a functioning community garden, and the kind of exhausted, low-grade politics that formed when people had been living together under pressure long enough. The hard faction had arrived 6 weeks ago. There were 11 of them. Originally from Bellhaven, Logan recognized the pattern from what he'd heard, though he hadn't connected the dots until a trader at the Crestfield perimeter mentioned the group from the south, the ones with the rules. Their rules were simple. Anyone who wanted Crestfield's protection had to contribute, and contribution was defined and evaluated by them. The community garden output was theirs to distribute. The trade routes were theirs to tax. And anyone who caused problems who consumed without contributing, as one of them put it in the community meeting 2 weeks back, was subject to sanction. Sanction was a clean word for what it actually was. Logan had heard about a man named Cale, who'd been the first person sanctioned. He was 41, had a bad knee from a pre-collapse accident, couldn't work the garden or the wall without pain. The hard faction had labeled him unproductive and given him 3 days to find a way to contribute or leave. On the second day, someone had found him a crutch and told him he could do perimeter watch from the guard booth seated. The hard faction had called that accommodation unfair to the workers. On the morning of the 3rd day, Cale was gone. His crutch was still at the guard booth. Nobody at Crestfield said what they thought had happened because saying it out loud was its own kind of risk. But Logan could smell the fear in the community, not the sharp spike of acute danger, but the low chronic burn of people who had accepted something wrong, because the alternative was to face what it meant. He found the guard at the community's east gate, a young man who was clearly not part of the hard faction, and who looked at Logan with the expression of someone who had been waiting for something to happen without knowing what shape it would take. "How long?" Logan said. The young man understood the question. 6 weeks since they got here. The bad part started about 2 weeks in. "How many kids in this community?" A pause. 14, mostly young under 10. "Where are they kept?" "The school building." He hesitated. "The faction uses it for storage. The kids and their families got moved to the East Block." Logan clocked the layout in his head. East Block, away from the faction's primary footprint, which meant the kids were at the edge of a position the faction would use as leverage if things went wrong. Predictable. Standard. "Is there one of them who's in charge?" Logan said. "Goes by Kessel. Big guy. Doesn't threaten. He just describes consequences. Very calm about it." Logan nodded once. He didn't go to find Kessel. He went to the school building. The school building was a converted elementary low single story, the kind with wide corridors and primary colored signage bleached to pastels by years of sun. The faction used 3 of its 6 classrooms for storage medical supplies, food reserves tools. The other 3 were locked. Logan stood outside one of the locked classrooms and listened through the door. Children, not distressed. The sound was flat, tamped down the quality of kids who had been told to be quiet enough times that quiet had become their default. He counted breathing signatures 7. The door was padlocked from the outside with a hasp and staple setup. 1 claw through the staple. The hasp pulled free. He opened the door. 7 children, ages ranging from maybe 5 to 11. 2 adults, with them women. 1 holding an infant, 1 sitting with her back against the wall, with the body language of someone who had stopped expecting the door to open in her favor. The room smelled like too many people and not enough air circulation, and the specific flatness of spaces where fear had been held for a long time. Logan stood in the doorway. He didn't go in. "Is there a back exit from this building?" he said. The woman against the wall processed that for a moment. Then she stood. "Service corridor, south end. Take them through it, south then west, away from the main gate. There's a water treatment facility about a mile out, follow the pipes. Stay until morning." She looked at him the way people looked at things they hadn't decided whether to trust yet. Then she looked at the children and made the calculation that the decision wasn't really about trust. "Go," Logan said. They went. He stayed at the doorway until the corridor was quiet, then turned and walked toward the building's front entrance and found Kessel waiting for him in the main corridor. Kessel was as described, large, calm, with the specific stillness of someone who had learned that stillness communicated more than aggression. He had 2 people behind him and 1 to his right, and all 3 had weapons in hand, without pointing them, which was its own kind of language. "You just opened a locked door," Kessel said. "I did," Logan said. "Those people are under community protection." "They're under a lock." Logan stopped 10 feet from him. "That's not the same thing." Kessel studied him. Not the quick threat assessment scan. Most people ran something slower, more thorough. "You're the one from the stories," he said. "Which stories?" "The ones where property keeps disappearing." A pause calibrated. "We're not doing anything wrong. This settlement needed structure. We provided it." "The man with the crutch," Logan said. Something moved across Kessel's face. Quick, controlled. "He left voluntarily." "Where'd he go?" "That's not our concern." Logan let that sit for a moment. Around him, the bleached primary color signage of the old elementary school made the corridor feel like a set for something that should not have been happening in it. He thought about the crutch at the guard booth, about the smell of the locked classroom, about the infant someone was now carrying through a service corridor at night. "You're going to leave Crestfield," Logan said. "Today, all 11 of you." "That's not something you can make happen," Kessel said. His voice was still calm. "We have 30 armed people who've agreed to our terms. 30 guns." Logan took 2 steps forward. "Not 30 loyalties. There's a difference." He stopped 5 feet from Kessel. "I'm going to walk out of this building and remove 3 things: your food reserve, your transport, and the story that you're the ones with the keys. After that, you can have Crestfield. See how long the 30 hold." A pause. "Or you leave today with what you came with. Nobody gets hurt. The story that follows you out is that you left, not that you were removed." A long silence, the kind where the numbers ran. "You'd do that," Kessel said. "For a place you walked into an hour ago." "For the kids in that building," Logan said. "The rest of it's adjacent." Another silence. Then Kessel looked at the man to his right, and the man lowered his weapon by about 10 degrees, which was not agreement, but was the opening move of one. Logan walked out of the building. He went to the storage areas and pulled the padlocks. Not the stores themselves, just the locks, hauling each hasp clean and leaving the doors open. Within 20 minutes, Crestfield residents were inside taking inventory of what was theirs. The price barrier was gone before the faction had finished packing. He found their 3 vehicles in the motor pool and put claw marks through each engine block in the same quick 2-pass motion he'd used months back at Grant's facility. Not destroyed, disabled. Leaving today meant leaving on foot, which meant leaving light. By mid-morning, Kessel's people were gone. Logan didn't watch them go. He was at the east block where the families had come back from the water treatment facility when word reached them that the locks were off. And he was sitting on a step outside the east block's main building eating something from his bag, when a woman who'd been in the locked classroom with the children sat down next to him without asking permission and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "There was a man here before them. Kale. Couldn't work the garden." "I heard," Logan said. "They took him at night. 2 of them walked him out past the perimeter and came back without him." She looked at her hands. "We all knew. Nobody said it." Logan didn't say anything. "Why not?" she said, not accusatory, asking a real question. "We all knew and none of us." "Because knowing and doing are different weights," Logan said. "And 30 armed people is a lot of weight." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is that supposed to make it easier?" "No," he said. She nodded slowly, like that was actually the right answer. He left Crestfield in the early afternoon and was 2 miles out when he found where Kale had gone. It was in a drainage ditch off the eastern road, not hidden, just not visible from the road, unless you were moving at ground level, which Logan was. He'd gone to check a sound he'd heard and filed, and then understood. He stood at the edge of the ditch for a moment. Kale was there, had been there a while. What was left of him had drawn a small cluster of the dead contained by the ditch walls, which was why the sound was what it was. Logan stood there long enough to have stood there, then kept walking. The road east of Crestfield was quiet, the mid-afternoon light flat and gray under cloud cover. He was running the Kale calculation, the way you ran things you couldn't change, not to find an answer, just to make sure you understood the question. He'd arrived 6 weeks too late for Kale. He'd have arrived 6 weeks too late, even if he'd been moving faster. The math didn't produce a solution. It just produced a number. He was 3 miles out when he picked up the first wrong smell. Not human overwrought, what he'd learned to clock as whisperer signature. This was different rot on a large scale, moving directional. A herd and a substantial one. Coming from the northeast, angled southwest along a bearing that would intersect the interstate junction in 4 or 5 hours at whatever pace it was making. He stopped on the road and ran the geometry. The interstate junction was where 4 settlements connected their supply routes. It was the region's functional hub, the container trading post, the water treatment distribution point 3 roads in and 3 roads out. If a herd hit it at full scale, the supply network collapsed. Survivors without supply lines didn't last long enough for the math to get complicated. He pulled the scent apart. It was a big herd, bigger than the one he'd held on the Fire Road Bridge, bigger than anything he'd encountered in this region since. And layered under the rot faint. But there the off note of a blade oiled and carried against skin, human sweat under something dead, the whisperer. Signature he'd learned to separate from background decay, not accidental. Directed. He thought about the cage on the highway. This wasn't hunger. This was design. Rowan, or whoever was running the herd, had scaled up. Either they'd found a reason to, or someone had given them one. He thought about Grant, who'd gone looking for a phone that worked. He thought about find out what he won't walk away from. He stood on the empty road in the flat afternoon light, and the calculation was simpler than it looked. 4 or 5 hours. 4 miles to the junction, groups at the hub that didn't know what was coming. He could go around. He'd been going around things for weeks. It was the practical choice, the one that kept the variable moving. He didn't go around. He adjusted his bag, rolled his shoulders once, and started moving toward the junction at a pace that covered ground without announcing it. Behind him on the road, the smell was getting stronger. The herd was already moving. Somewhere inside it, people who breathed were keeping it pointed at what they wanted it to hit. Enough, Logan thought. Not a decision. Just the word that came when a line stopped being theoretical and started being a place you could stand. He walked. He smelled it before he heard it, and heard it before he saw it. The smell came first, rot on a mass scale, the way it built when bodies numbered in the hundreds and moved together. The collective exhalation of decomposition turned into something that had weight and direction. Under it, layered in and out like a signal beneath static, the whisperer's signature blade oil, human sweat, the metabolic heat of living bodies doing the work of staying alive inside something dead. Faint. Moving. Then the sound, not individual groans, but the aggregate, the way 1,000 small sounds compressed into a frequency that traveled through ground before it traveled through air. Logan felt it in the soles of his boots 3 minutes before the leading edge of the herd crested the highway, rise to the south. He was already at the junction. The junction was what it had always been, an intersection of 4 county roads, where the old interstate on-ramp created a 5th angle. The whole assembly presided over by a defunct gas station and 2 cargo containers that someone had dragged perpendicular to the road 6 months back to create a windbreak and trading space. On any given day, it held 30 to 60 people cycling through supply runners, family groups moving between settlements, traders with hand carts, a rotating cast of individuals going somewhere, or coming from somewhere, or trying to decide which. Today was a market day, closer to 80. Logan moved through the crowd fast, not running. Running made people run, and people running made noise, and noise at volume was its own kind of accelerant. He went to the container setup, first to the man who sat at the gap between the 2 containers, and tracked who came through. "Herd," Logan said. "South rise, 20 minutes, maybe less. You need to move these people north." The man stared at him, then past him at the highway rise, where the horizon was doing something that horizons didn't do, moving. He didn't argue. He stood and started yelling. 20 was for them. Logan had counted closer to 8. What happened in the next 10 minutes was not a coordinated evacuation. It was 80 people, making 80 individual calculations simultaneously, and the calculations did not align. 3 families with vehicles loaded fast and drove north of the right call. A trader with a hand cart full of medical supplies tried to get his cart moving and blocked the primary exit lane. 2 men behind him shoved the cart sideways into the ditch rather than help him steer, and the cart went over and the medical supplies scattered across the gravel, and someone else grabbed 2 of the containers before the trader could get to them and kept moving. A man with a rifle, nervous, too young for the weapon, trigger finger wrong, heard the aggregate sound, hit audible range, and fired twice into the air. The shots went wide of anything, but they went loud, and the herd, which had been moving on scent and ambient sound, had a new directional input now. The bearing tightened. A woman with 2 children made it to the north road and then stopped and turned back because she'd left a pack at the trading space, and the people behind her had to split around her, and the split pushed a family of 4 onto the shoulder. And the father twisted an ankle in the drainage ditch and went down. Logan got to him, hauled him up by the jacket collar, one-handed, got him moving. "North," Logan said. "Don't stop." He watched them go and turned back. The herd was at the south rise now, the leading edge spilling over the crest like water over a lip, and the frequency had shifted from ground transmission to airborne, the full weight of it hitting the junction in a wave. The remaining people, 20, maybe 25, who hadn't cleared the north road yet, broke into a run, which was the right instinct and the wrong execution. Because running in a crowd compressed the crowd, and compressed crowds at bottlenecks were their own kind of problem. The bottleneck was the gap between the two containers. One container end to the other, maybe 8 feet, wide enough for 2 people abreast, narrow enough that 20 panicking people would jam it in under 15 seconds. Logan went to it and stood at the south-facing side. He didn't try to stop the herd at the gap. The herd was too large for that math to work, and he knew it. What he did was stand at the entrance and manage the flow. Keep the gap clear, keep the human side from compressing into a crush that would trap everyone. The first person through was a teenage boy moving fast, head down. Logan stepped aside and let him go. The next 3 came together, and one of them caught the container edge with her shoulder and spun, and Logan caught her before she went down and kept her moving. Behind her, the father he'd pulled from the ditch was coming through with his family limping, his wife pulling the children through. The leading edge of the herd reached the gas station. The dead moved around obstacles without caring about obstacles, through the defunct pump islands, over the dropped handcart, into the scattered medical supplies, without noticing any of it. They came toward the gap, because the gap was where the sound was, where the movement was, where the living were. Logan held the south side of the gap. The first contact was a grab at his left arm, which he redirected. Then, 2 at once, both coming through the same angle, and he planted his feet and let them hit him rather than step back. A step back gave ground he didn't have to give. They hit him with the weight of dead things that didn't metabolize momentum, and he held. A third found his right shoulder from the side teeth at the back of his neck. He got a hand up and between and took the bite on the forearm instead. The familiar pressure, the grinding, the moment his brain registered and filed as cost, ongoing, manageable, and put his shoulder into the mass and shoved. Behind him, the gap was clearing. He could hear it in the sound pattern, fewer feet, less panic breathing, the crowd thinning. Something took his ankle, and he went down to 1 knee. 3 on him, then the weight distributed and real, and not something leverage fixed cleanly. He drove an elbow into the nearest, got a purchase on the container wall, and pushed upright. The forearm wound was already doing what it did. He didn't look at it. He stood. A woman on the north side of the gap, already clear, already safe, was screaming at him. Not for help. At him. The expression on her face was not gratitude and not fear, but something older. The specific horror of watching the thing that shouldn't be possible happen right in front of you. He understood. He'd looked that way before from the other side. He pulled the container gap clear of the nearest cluster, redirect push step, and looked back into the gap. Empty. The last of the evacuating group was through. He needed to close the gap. The containers each weighed several tons. He couldn't move them. But the gap wasn't a gap between the containers themselves. It was a gap between a container end and a section of mesh fencing someone had strung between them to create a partial enclosure. The fencing was wire stapled to wooden posts sunk in gravel, and the posts were already leaning under the pressure of dead weight beginning to accumulate against them. Logan got both hands on the nearest post, old fence post, capped with a rusted iron sleeve at the top, and pulled it up and out of the gravel in a single motion wire still attached. Then drove the post horizontally through the gap at chest height of the dead and into the hasp bracket of the container door behind it. The iron cap caught behind the bracket and held the post braced at an angle, wire splaying out across the gap, creating an obstruction the dead pressed against but couldn't clear quickly. It wouldn't hold long. It didn't need to. He backed up through the gap from the south side, working the wire to stay behind the obstruction as it bowed inward and came out the north side. The herd was going to have the junction in under a minute. What was there to have a wrecked handcart, scattered supplies, a gas station that hadn't had gas in 6 years? Nothing that mattered to the dead. They'd mill and disperse and drift within an hour. Logan looked north, where the road curved out of sight toward the settlement clusters. He didn't follow. None. He found a spot on the elevated on-ramp embankment where the grade dropped sharply behind him, and the grass was high enough to break his silhouette, and the wind was running south, carrying scent away from the junction. The angle let him see both the dispersing mass and the north road without being clocked from either. He sat there and watched the herd do what herds did with empty space. Feel it slow down, lose coherence. Somewhere inside the mass, the whisperers were bleeding off. He caught the barest trace of the signature drifting east, dispersing no fixed point. Method without fingerprints. They'd been close enough to observe and far enough to not be committed. He sat and watched until the herd's coherence broke. 40 minutes, maybe 45. Then he climbed down from the embankment and walked along the highway shoulder going north at his own pace. A quarter mile up the road, he found where the junction's crowd had stopped to reconstitute people clustered at the shoulder, some sitting, some standing. The flat, exhausted aftermath of a crisis that had resolved without killing everyone. He counted 31. Started at 80. The math said some were still ahead on the road, and some had peeled off before the stop. Some of the math he didn't want to finish. He saw the woman who'd been screaming at him from the north side of the gap. She was sitting on the roadway with her knees up, watching him come. When he got close enough, she looked up and said flatly, "What are you?" He'd been asked that before, on a fire road, on a county road outside a hardware store. It meant different things from different people. From her it meant, "I need a category for you, and none of the ones I have fit." "Passing through," Logan said. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the junction behind him, where the dead were doing what the dead did to empty space. "You came back in," she said, "after everyone else was out?" He didn't respond to that. "Why?" she said. He thought about the man with the crutch at a guard booth in Crestfield, about a ring bolt in his jacket pocket, about kale in a ditch and a container lock and 3,800 miles of road that hadn't gotten any shorter since he started walking it. "Because the gap needed holding," he said. She looked like she wanted a better answer. Then she looked at her hands at the junction at him again. "People are going to talk about what they saw," she said. "You know that?" "Yeah," Logan said. "What do you want them to say?" He thought about it for half a second. "The truth." She nodded slow, like she was deciding whether that was useful. He didn't wait to find out. He kept walking. The north road opened into flat country. After the first curve, the sky large and gray and indifferent, the way sky over flat country always was. He walked at the edge of the road and didn't think about what was behind him in any organized way, just let it settle the way things settled after they were done. The junction would be stripped by morning. People would come back for what they'd left. What was still recoverable, and they'd find the herd dispersed and the handcart overturned, and the medical supplies gone, and the wire fencing bowed, and the post stuck through the gap like a bar across a door. They'd take what they could and argue about who'd lost what and who was responsible. And some of them would leave before the argument finished, and some would stay and rebuild, and some would do both. The bite on his forearm had closed completely before the on-ramp. He pushed the sleeve down. Somewhere behind him, south dispersing east, the whisperers were doing whatever they did after a herd broke up. He thought about Rowan watching the bridge sequence from a tree, watching the junction from somewhere he hadn't identified, taking notes. A method that didn't need to win to be useful, just to keep running. He thought about Grant, who'd made a phone call, who'd handed information about a man who wouldn't walk away from certain things to a group who weaponized herds. The calculation on that wasn't finished. He filed it. The road stretched ahead. The light was going copper at the edges, the day burning down from the west in the way days did when they were almost spent. A farmhouse sat in the middle distance, dark, intact, The kind of structure that had outlasted its purpose by years and would keep outlasting it until something physical ended it. He'd sleep there tonight and be gone by first light. The world stayed what it was. The dead moved through it, and the living moved through it, and both made a mess of whatever they touched, and nothing cleaned up after anyone. And none of it was going to stop being true because of what had happened at the junction today or yesterday or any other day. But somewhere between the County Road incident and the Fire Road Bridge and the trading post and Grant's facility and a classroom full of children and a ring bolt in his pocket and a junction where a herd went and a wire fence held for the time it needed to hold somewhere in there, a different kind of calculation had started running in the region. Not justice. Not redemption. Just a variable the math hadn't accounted for before. Don't cage people. Don't use children. Don't point the dead at the living for profit. Not because it was wrong. People who needed a reason beyond its wrong weren't going to be reached by a reason. Because the variable was out there. Because the variable had a way of being somewhere you didn't expect and leaving things unusable that you'd built and counted on. Because the variable was inconvenient and persistent and deeply uninterested in your operational requirements. Logan walked until the farmhouse was close enough to matter. Then he turned off the road and went to it. Behind him on the highway, the last of the copper light hit the asphalt and flared once and went out. The world stayed broken. It just got harder to break people for free.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel, and be sure to turn on notification so you won't miss our future video. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.